Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Finance and Corporate Services Committee. We have a very busy day today, so let's get right into it. Before I ask for a mover on the consent items, there is an addition for items 5 and 6. And that is for both clauses 5 and 6. You need to add a part at the bottom that says that the mayor and clerk be authorized to execute agreements satisfactory to the city solicitor with recipients of grants under the Starter Company Plus program. And the second for number 6 is pretty much the same, except it says under the Summer Company program. Okay, is everyone clear on that? Okay, moved by Councillor Ioannidis. I have 2 people in the queue. Councillor Ioannidis, that was to move it, I presume? Okay. Councillor Gazzola.
What was that to move what?
All the consent items.
All of them? Okay, yeah. No, I would just like to ask a couple of questions and make a comment.
On which item?
I would just want to make a quick comment on 1 and ask some questions on 5, 6, and 7. 1 question.
Pardon me, a comment on number 1, and then you want to take out number 5, 6, and 7?
Yes, please.
Okay. And before I'll take that motion, I have Councillor Yaneski. And he wants to take out number 8. And Councillor Fernandez. And Councillor Fernandez is number 8 as well. Okay. So the motion's been moved. Actually, we'll have to take 5, 6, and 7 first. Those in favor? Okay, that carries. And item number 8, those in favor?
I'm sorry, I said, yeah.
Oh, sorry. I meant to say that the motion was to take it out for discussion. So we'll take that vote again. So items 5, 6, and 7, taking them out for discussion. Those in favor? And opposed? That carries. And item number 8, out for discussion. Those in favor? And that's unanimous. Councillor Gazzola.
I just want to make a comment first on item number 1. I think it's a good program. I'm glad to see that we're supporting it, and I think it does really help. And staff are doing a good job and stating that it really doesn't take much time. So I hope that program continues. It gives people an opportunity to make donations to organizations that perhaps wouldn't be able to take advantage of them. Okay, on items number 5, 6, and 7, I would like to have had some financial statements for those along with budget estimates. I've asked for that before on this, and I would like to get, if it's possible, to get those before these come back to council on the 20th. Simple question.
So I'd look to staff. Is that something that we can accommodate? Ms. Farrell?
Yes, we can do that. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Councillor Gazzola. Councillor Fernandez.
Yes, number 8. I would like to understand maybe a little bit more from Mr. Gross. This is the second time we've been here asking for an extension on the purchase order for the work that was done at the Dune South Sanitary Pumping Station. I understand, of course, that there's been an increase in working days. I understand that the pumping station contractor took longer to finish the construction of the pumping station due to unforeseen variable soil conditions. Now, I know that there was a lot of challenges around that project, but help me understand why we are not building that in to the criteria. We've talked about this before. I've mentioned it before. I know that this doesn't put us over budget. I understand that. But I think our contractors need to understand when they do a tender, the tender is solid. So help me understand the $33,000 extra dollars outside of what you've already included in your report.
Mr. Gross.
Through the chair, the work is for the consultant, not the contractor. And the consultants typically are tied to the work that a contractor does or has to do. In this particular case, the glaciers were not kind to us in this area. It's a real mixed bag of gravel, groundwater. The soils are very, very poor. And there needed to be changes made in the design because some of the methods of installing pipes needed to be changed simply because of those conditions. That extra effort was well worth it simply because we were able to save some money in construction, approximately $90,000. But to do that, we have to do an extra effort in the design. There's also the issue of trying to pour a large structure deep underground. Sometimes you have to do it with continuous concrete pours, which last not just an 8-hour day, they last 24 hours, and you've really got to get it done in order for that to work properly. A lot of these things, excuse me, a lot of these things are unforeseen. They can't be foreseen when you put together the terms of reference for a consultant. They come at you from the side, and it's something that you simply don't know. Unfortunately, this is the second time I'm in front of you. We're going to, we have built in some contingencies into assignments, but there are areas in town that are more difficult to work in than others. And we're taking a look at how best to address that with additional contingencies, which only get spent if required, so that we're not having to come to you each time. What we want to do is build in as much flexibility, but without spending the money if we don't have to.
Okay, and I can appreciate that. And I'm watching my clock. Sorry, Mr. Gross.
I'm sorry.
I don't want to shortchange you on your answer. So two quick questions then. Wouldn't we have had or expected the consultant to have done some soil testing, borehole testing before we even went into that area? And the second question is the extension of some work that's going to be happening on Dodge Drive, and I think we're going to see some of the same soil conditions and some of the same challenges. So how can we build in, and you've already said you've been looking at that, build in some of this buffering, this contingency on that project coming up? So that you're not having to come back to us a couple of times.
Okay, two quick answers. The first answer is that the soils conditions are examined through a tender put out by the city, not that consultant, so that we provide the consultant with a geotechnical report that has that information. Sometimes it's not as, I'm going to say complete, because you cannot put a borehole every foot. There has to be some consideration there. In terms of the Dodge Drive, yes, there will be challenges on Dodge Drive. I have no doubt about it. And we're looking at how best to build in those conditions so that we don't end up with this.
Okay, since I have 44 more seconds, what happens if we don't pay this extra $33,000? Does the consultant have to eat it?
Well, I would strongly urge you not to do that, simply because we have worked with the consultant to come to a conclusion and to come to a reasonable understanding of what's extra.
Okay, thanks so much.
Councillor Gazzola?
Yeah, I just, so this is $315,000 over on this job.
That's correct.
Does any of it revert back to the contractor? Are they liable for any of this overrun?
Through the chair, no.
So I find it hard to understand why there would be 50% more inspection days.
Through the chair, the short answer is the conditions in the ground required it.
We went from 240 days to 360 days. They should have put up a tent there and just stayed.
It was a very difficult project.
Okay, the other thing, why are we this was all over in September of last year. Why are we just hearing about it now?
This was done in September, and what we did was we simply looked at how much is reasonable to request in terms of extras. So we worked with a consultant to try and sort that out.
Okay, I wanted to ask you that. Did they ask for more than what you're paying here?
Yes.
Can you give us some idea of the scope of what they were asking for, the amount?
Approximately 50% more.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Yaneski?
Yeah, further on this project, each project that has been analyzed, staff go ahead and say it's going to cost so much based on your best pieces of information that you have. And then you apply a contingency of 10% or 30%, depending on the scenario. What was the contingency on this project?
The contingency on this project, the contractor's construction contingency typically is in the order of 5 to 7% based on the detailed final tender documents. The consultants typically have a very, very small contingency amount that we've put in there because we feel that their terms of reference are fairly scoped, well scoped. We found that on some projects such as this, the difficult ones where we're running into difficulties, we're going to be looking at increasing the consultant contingency to more like 5%, between 5 and 7% as well. We simply haven't done that in the past, and it has come back to haunt us.
Okay, appreciate that. So when this project was done, then there was a contingency set aside. Since this project was very difficult, as you've said, I was gathered that the contingency was spent on other items. And now you're coming back with this. Then my other question then lies up also on the page. It says other outstanding encumbrances, and that's $137,000 at the bottom of page 8.2. What is that? Is that tied in with extra work that's still on top of this, or I don't know? I have no idea. Help me out.
Through the chair, I don't have a list of what those are. Those are simply items that have been charged against the project that haven't been paid yet.
Oh, I see. So they could be contingencies?
No, those are items that are charged against the project. They could be anything. They could be soils testing. They could be anything at all. I just don't have a list of what they are.
Okay. So really what we're just dealing with is the $33,000 here on this recommendation, and the others have sort of been addressed through the phasing of the project and the budget covering the whole thing, basically.
That's correct.
As I would say, $12 million, which is the whole big package.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. No questions. I just comment on this item that I'm not really sure which actions that we could be taking, because on one hand, like, committee and council don't want to see estimates that come in significantly over or under budget. And I would note that despite the two unforeseeable issues that have come up on this, the projection still is to come in, albeit slightly under budget. So I do find it interesting that they are pretty close at the end of the day. So anyway, these items have all been moved. I haven't asked for anything to be broken out separately. So I'll take the vote. Those in favor of the consent items. And that carries unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Gross. Mr. Goodeve, the ward boundary review.
Thank you. The last ward boundary review was conducted in 2008 in response to an increase in the size of council. Council Policy Gov-050 requires a review after every second municipal election. The intent of the report that is before you is to satisfy that requirement. Ward boundary reviews are typically conducted in response to some predominant change that affects the composition of council, such as annexations, amalgamations, provincial restructuring, or increases in council size. In the absence of any impetus for change, this review focused on the appropriateness of the current ward boundaries within the context of the guiding principles as set out in the council policy and shown on the screen, which align with past OMB and Supreme Court decisions and are generally followed for all ward boundary reviews across Canada, or across Ontario. It's important to note that no one principle is applied in isolation, but rather work in concert with one another to achieve an overall balance in the number, size, composition, and configuration of wards. The Supreme Court recognized that protecting communities of interest may justify overriding the principle of voter parity. The court did not define community of interest, but OMB appeals have recognized historical settlement and economic patterns, as well as social, historical, economic, religious, and linguistic groups. The 2008 boundaries remain consistent with this principle, as 90% of the city's current affiliated neighborhood associations are contained within individual wards. Any changes to the current configuration would undoubtedly result in the splintering of some of those communities of interest. In an ideal ward system, every councillor would represent the same number of constituents. This is typically referred to as the optimal size. Inevitably, there are variations in the density and character of communities and neighborhoods. Population variations of up to 25% above or below the optimal size is considered generally acceptable. This range is consistent with federal redistribution provisions. Currently, 8 of the wards are within 15% of the optimal size. Ward 2 falls outside the range by 125 people, which is considered a statistical anomaly. In 2018, Ward 2 falls back into the optimal range, and 80% of the wards are within 15% of the optimal size. By 2022, the overall population numbers are projected to shift slightly, with 7 wards being within 15%. Even this far into the future, no wards are estimated to exceed the optimal threshold of 25%. For 2026, it is estimated that only 5 wards would be within 15% of the optimal size, with 4 wards being within 16 to 25%. By this time, Ward 5 is projected to exceed the optimal range by approximately 3,163 residents. This number grows to 8,400 by 2031. By that time, Ward 9 is also projected to exceed the optimal range by 1,250 residents, and only 4 wards would remain within 15% of the optimal size. Taken together, the review shows a change in the current ward boundaries in advance of the 2018 election is not warranted based on population. Relative population parity is projected to be maintained until after the next scheduled review following the 2022 election. This principle acknowledges that wards should be compact, straightforward, and easy to remember. Topographical features are undeniably one of the most visible attributes of a municipality and should be integrated into ward boundary designs where appropriate. The 2008 review identified those boundaries to include the Grand River and man-made boundaries such as the Expressway, as well as many arterial roads such as King Street, Fisher-Hallman Road, Bleems Road, Homer-Watson Boulevard, and Ottawa Street, to name a few. The current boundaries continue to be suitable as they provide citizens with easily identifiable features to define what constitutes their wards. Fundamentally, the current composition of the existing ward boundaries remains sound and continue to adhere to the principles set out in the council policy. Accordingly, no adjustments are being recommended at this time. The boundaries will again be reviewed following the 2022 municipal election, at which time it is anticipated that consideration may need to be given to reconfiguring their current design. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Goodeve. I have one person in the queue at the moment, Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Chair Davey. Thanks, Colin, for this good work. And my question is relating to, can you go back in the slides? Can you, a little further? One more? Okay. What I find kind of really interesting in this slide is when I see the population range, and one of the ones that stands out to me is Ward 10. And why I don't see hardly any growth there when this is supposed to be an intensification area. Can you explain how these statistics were gathered?
Yes, these statistics were provided by the region. They use their land planning models, and it's based on their forecasted growth. I met with our own planning staff and discussed sort of where they saw the local nuances to it. It was indicated that for certain wards, such as Ward 5, there might be an overestimation in the projected growth because of the what's previously occurred with the regional official plan.
Okay. Thanks, Colin.
Point of clarification, Mayor Rabinovich.
Well, and just further to that, these numbers are how each of the wards relate to the optimal range. They're not the actual growth. So if everything grows 5%, that becomes the basis, and then it's how off that 5% you are, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. There are 3 people in the queue. Councillor Fernandez.
I just wanted just to note more of a comment than a question, and I appreciate Ms. Tarling coming in and chatting with me about this last week. And in the report, Colin, you do talk about the Strasbourg alignment on page 9-7. When I look at the growth that's expected in Ward 5, it's not surprising to me. And my hope would be that as we review, come closer to review in 2022, that we would take a look at Strasbourg Road as being the natural delineation between Ward 4 and 5, which would reduce that distribution of population between Ward 4 and 5 at that boundary. Is that something that is something that you would consider looking at as well as possible redistribution between Ward 7 and 6 for Ward 5?
Through the chair, I would definitely think that would be taken into consideration. In terms of knowing exactly where the appropriate boundary would be at that time, it depends on how growth might be projected for that area. Right. Once we get closer, that date for the next review comes around. But I'd say that would definitely be looked at as a potential for a natural boundary that could be used to delineate the 2 wards. And
I can certainly understand, why you haven't done that yet. I mean, the protected countryside and countryside line had been put into the regional official plan. Given the OMB appeal and the new decisions, that's definitely going to change the population growth along that road, along that corridor. So I just wanted to mention it, and thanks for the work that you did on this.
Thank you, Councillor Yaneski.
Interesting statistics and analysis that you've done, and I think it's done quite well. Question I have comes to page 9-6, dealing with comparison to other municipalities and how we fit in. And I know it probably wasn't part of the analysis intent of looking at our wards in terms of growth for each ward or lack of growth. But when I look at the number of wards in each municipality and the population per ward, we seem to fall more or less in the middle or just under the middle. Is there provincial legislations as to how many minimum councillors per ward there has to be versus maximum? Because then I'm wondering, with us having 10 wards, should we be changing the number of wards from what we had before, from 6 to 10, 10 to maybe some other figure going up or down? I don't know. Because when I look at Greater Sudbury, it's only 1 councillor for their 13,000 people. Yet I look at Mississauga, it's 1 councillor for every almost 70,000 people. And you almost have exactly the same number of councillors on their council, 11 versus 12. So we seem to fit in the middle. Is there a provincial change or requirements on this, or is it every city on their own?
Ms. Goodeve?
Through the chair, there is no provincial mandate or requirements in terms of wards. In fact, a municipality can have elections at large and have no wards at all. The only requirement, I believe, is the municipal act does state that you must have a minimum of 5 members of council.
I'm sorry, say the last part?
I believe the municipal act states, I believe, a minimum of 5 members of a council.
So these municipalities, as you've noted here, are basically one-tier municipalities? Well, but Mississauga's got Peel, so you haven't looked at the regional component at all?
Through the chair, we didn't factor in any kind of regional municipalities into this. We were looking at municipalities with populations of at least 125,000 or more.
Yeah.
And we excluded a couple that had where they did do elections at large, and then 2 where they had multiple councillors per single wards.
Okay. And one sort of slight aside, Toronto, I see you've got 47 wards. I thought they had 44.
Through the chair, they actually just completed a ward boundary review where they added 3 additional wards.
You're right. Forgot about that. Thank you.
Okay, there are no further questions in the queue. Thank you, Mr. Goodeve. Could I get a mover for this item? Moved by Councillor Fernandez. Comments? Not seeing any. I'll comment just briefly. I had no questions on this. I thought the report spoke for itself and makes a lot of sense. I'd also reiterate what we see on page 9-8, that this work is often done by consultants but was done in-house, and I think at great value. So I'll be happy to support the recommendation. Councillor Hernandez?
Yes, thanks, Councillor Davey. I'm actually a little disappointed in Mr. Colin Goodieff, because the way I look at it here, I thought he was going to say Councillor Schneider and myself were going to get pay raises for the most representation here. So.
Okay, as moved by Councillor Fernandez, those in favor? And that carries unanimously. Can we start early for, I think we are early, right? For community services? There's no, we can't? Okay, we cannot. All right. So we'll see you at 10:30.